Continue with the conversation on, of course, the case that is still in court with the fugitive that is back in the country. This is Divani, Yaganesh, and the four that so far have been acquitted in this particular case. And we're looking at what is happening, especially with the DPP and the recent spate of cases that have been falling through the cracks because of lack of credible evidence, and also the declining of Henry Rotich, the former CS of Treasury, who the president had tapped to be his presidential advisor on matters economy. And right now he elects to get at his statement at the Central Bank of Kenya. But we look at Aroro and Kimwerera, the case that fell through the cracks because of this sloppiness from that particular department of DPP, and how also when all these cases now go down the tubes, somebody is also up to be maybe a presidential advisor or is tapped to be a chairman elsewhere, and maybe their cases which are rife or they are still alive in the courts. What does this really portend, especially when it comes to integrity and Chapter 6 of the Constitution? Otito Mola, I wanted you just to pick up on this so far. And these are many cases that we've had, just not pointing just at Henry Rotich. We have many cases that have fallen through the cracks because of lack of credible evidence from the DPP. We can talk about the Anglo leasing for the longest time as well.
Thank you. Let me come to that, but first, Honorable Malim has made two statements which should not be left unchallenged because they may mislead the viewers. Number one is attacking the judiciary, that the judiciary is misusing power, and that power came as a result of devolution, that we were devolving power. Actually, dispersing even whether dispersing, devolving, whatever, the one arm of government that in respect of which nothing changed in terms of power is the judiciary. Devolution of power was devolution especially of executive power, and the executive power that was devolved, none of it went to the judiciary. It went to the devolved units, that is the counties. Some went actually to Parliament, some went to the independent commissions and independent officers. The only difference in terms of judicial power is that initially there was no express statement in the Constitution saying the judiciary exercises exclusive judicial power directly from the people. So the power exercised by the judiciary is not as a result of devolution or dispersing. That one was always there. Whereas we did is that we made it express. So whatever, whether you like devolution or not, leave the judiciary out of it. Number two, Honorable Malim says that there's no internal mechanism of challenging anything that is done within the judiciary right now. That is not correct. The first mechanism is the Ombudsman Office. I actually helped establish an internal Ombudsman judiciary. And it is still there. I believe that it is currently the Deputy Chief Justice, who is also the Judiciary Ombudsman. And they are dealing with a lot of complaints. You can give an anonymous complaint, or you can disclose, or whatever. The second level is the Judicial Service Commission itself. If you think, and all these statements that people keep making, like Honorable Farah here, saying he has evidence of corruption within the judiciary, if you want to help this country, and you want to help yourself and the judiciary, don't make these comments on national television. Present a case to the Judicial Service Commission. If they do not prosecute it, then make it public. You can actually sue the Judicial Service Commission itself. By the way, I think that the one profession where people are most open is the legal profession. And that includes both those who are in the bench, like judges and magistrates, and those who are in the bar, because we have robust mechanisms for reporting malpractices and pursuing it. I have prosecuted some cases for doctors. Doctors, on the contrary, are very protective of each other. To prosecute a doctor, even before the board, it would take an unimaginable effort and cooperation. Now, let me come to
But let's challenge you on the issue of ombudsman as well.
Yes.
Because I think during the tenure we saw an ombudsman that was very active and alive. But in recent times, we can actually...
Even during your time, when did you question the ruling of a judge or a magistrate or a court of appeal judge?
That's very
When did you question that?
Malim, I will give you right now.
Yes.
I have it. I have an entire compendium of the decisions I made, some against judges, at least 7 against sitting judges, and I have it here, so that's not a problem. I have a compendium of my 5 years of the decisions I made, even against the president, even against the CJ, so that's not a problem. But let me come to the question you've asked about. There's a distinction between the Ombudsman of the Republic, and that is the Commission on Administrative Justice, and the internal Judiciary Ombudsman. The Commission of Administrative Justice is established by the Constitution, and the powers are clearly spelled out. The internal Judiciary Ombudsman was created when, as Ombudsman of the Republic, I realized that there were a lot of issues within the judiciary which needed to be tackled and could be tackled quickly administratively, and they did not need to come to the Ombudsman of the Republic. And that's how, in conjunction with CJ William Mutunga, that office was created. And so those are 2 different offices. Right. As to the performance on any, it is not in my place to comment. But let me continue with the line you had asked. You can pursue that later.
Yeah, I will. Yes. But I wanted to ask also, does it also work in complementarity with JSC, that particular...
The way the Office of the Ombudsman, the Judiciary works is this. You can raise any complaint against any judge or any magistrate, and you can raise it anonymously or you can make yourself known. Some of those complaints are very routine, like this routine thing of missing files, which you know has been a problem for a long time. You know, if somebody wants to interfere with administration of justice, you just don't find the file. And we were finding so many such cases, and yet these are cases which anyone senior within the judiciary, if they put their foot down, that file then is able to be found, okay? That's just an example. Or sometimes... Delayed judgment. Yes, delayed judgment. And sometimes those delays in judgments is intentional, some may be even by mistake. So you prompt and you find. The other instance is cases which are supposed to be listed, then you just find they're out of the coast list. Yeah. So as long as we have a lot of these routine things that can be resolved easily and internally. Now those are the ones they deal with. When it comes to, for example, the serious issue like disciplining of a magistrate or a judge, then the internal judiciary ombudsman cannot deal with that. That one, they would forward to the Judicial Service Commission, okay? The Judicial Service Commission then picks it up from there. And if it's a magistrate, they can deal with it. If it's a judge, then they can recommend a tribunal. And all those things have happened. Let me come to comment on what my brother was saying. And we start with the question of the regime. And Mungatana, my brother, says that when you talk of regime, it's almost like belittling, that it may not be legitimate and all. Of course, it is not legitimate. It is but legitimate. That was not my point. No, you will argue your case.
Let's not go that way.
It is illegitimate, and I will go there. You can have a legal regime which is illegitimate, and in my view, it's illegitimate.
No. What is illegitimate?
But the reason I use that term,
what is illegitimate?
You are becoming a heckler.
I'm not. Let us ask him.
Let him just make his...
Yeah. What is it? I agree you are a government apologist, but you don't have to heckle. Just present their case slowly. You are an apologist. Honorable Malim is a sympathizer.
You see.
Now,
the point is this. The reason why I use the word regime
support whatever we are saying.
If we use the word government, it becomes very confusing. When you say government, all of us here are in government, because we are members of Parliament, members of the Senate. Have we done any action in terms of what we are complaining? No. The judiciary itself is part of government, you know. So when you want to distinguish the executive from the rest of government, the better term to use is the regime. So is the William Ruto regime, just like we had the Uhuru Kenyatta regime, and you can distinguish them, because otherwise if you use government, you are mixing everyone, and government exists in perpetuity. Why am I saying this regime has an unreasonable number of acquittals and withdrawals? You don't have to. It's not rocket science. Just look at the number of cases that have collapsed since August 2022. Collapsed would mean either acquittal or withdrawals or, you know, all sorts of variations. You will see it is an unfair number. And that's part of the reason you will see a lot of our colleagues, either who are sitting governors or sitting members of parliament or former such persons, are being drawn to join the regime because there's a promise that if you do, then they will look with favor upon any such cases that are either existing or likely to be brought. And that is the truth. So there's nothing to apologize about that. You just need to look at the statistics. It is very, very clear. When you see the case of Divani, and I started by correcting the position. So we don't just comment out of malice, we comment out of reality. But the reality is that this gentleman was not brought back, as Mungatana is saying. He came back. By the time any person who has been a fugitive, as Malim says, has been living abroad, warrants were issued, by the time they are boarding in that foreign country, and you know, they had formally lost a case. So even the process of their coming back is a formal process. The regime here already knows. If they could even report, was it just the other week that watchmen who are guarding this thing in Embakasi were being arrested, and it's all over the news? Just a watchman, you know? How would we not have known about the return of Divani? Why did we not see him being arrested at the airport, being taken to Muthaiga, as Honorable Mugatana is saying, being put in Muthaiga, so that by the time he comes to court, the outrage we are now showing here would have been shown before. Do you know even judges and magistrates are also human beings? The public reaction and public opprobrium also helps them make certain decisions. Then we would know, for example, things we don't know. When he came to court, how was he able to explain his absence? Yeah, as Honorable Malim was saying. Did the DPP oppose bail or not? Because if the DPP does not oppose bail, then the court has no choice. You know, was the case made, you know, for him to be retained? All those things we would know. We don't get to know them because, in my view, all this was stage managed and arranged. And that is my submission.
So even if it's a legal right to actually seek for bail, the DPP can actually intervene?
Honorable Malim is completely right on that. Bail is an entitlement to every Kenyan, but it's not a right. It's an entitlement that you get depending on circumstances. One of those circumstances is you ought to show
that you're not a flight risk.
You are not a flight risk. But on the contrary, if you are a flight risk, or you have actually failed to come to court, you've taken off, then the DPP has a duty to demonstrate to the court that and ask the court to deny you bail. Bail is not automatic. It's an entitlement, but it comes with certain conditions. And I agree with Honorable Malim that one of those conditions, where you have already taken off for so many years, then you really, really have to work hard to persuade the court. Now, we don't know what happened.
And
because
it
was all covert.
Hold it there, hold it there.
Yes.
Our constitution, our 2010 constitution is express that procedures and other things are not going to be sacrificed on the altar of justice, substantive justice. Now, whether the DPP asks for that bail, that does not oppose bail or not, but a judge who's there, who knows the second, a judge, by the way, is an officer of the court. You get my point? Who is there does not have to wait. He has to see the situation. This man is extradited.
The difference is this, Honorable Mali.
Yes.
Our system of court is such that the judge and magistrate is supposed to be neutral. They are not supposed to be the one making the inquiry, looking at the newspapers and seeing. They are supposed to sit there and they can ask questions, but the parties ought to bring these things forward. So the persons, for example, the persons who knew that Divani was coming back should have arrested him, would have come to court and swore an affidavit that I arrested this man on this day, he came back, we had been looking for him for all these years, he was not there. That is the police that assist. The person to make the police affidavit come to court is the prosecuting authority. So you see, but my whole point is this, we are speculating because we don't know what happened. We don't know what happened because it was all covert. And that's my problem now coming to Henry Rotich.
But that impartiality, let me just hold you that impartiality itself was, and the fact that see no evil, hear no evil on the part of the judges themselves was cured in our 2010 Constitution. Substantive justice must be done, and the judge is supposed to question sometimes and say why, and basically see where justice has got to be served. And not just say that I'm independent, I'm neutral, and whatever they.
Honorable Malim sometimes talks as a lawyer and sometimes not as a lawyer, and on that he's not talking as a lawyer. And if we engage on that, we will derail from the original question. We can come back to it. Let's just focus on the question of Henry Rotich and this whole thing. Now, again, the acquittal of Henry Rotich, I have not read the actual judgment, so I cannot comment on its details. But it joins the long list of the pattern I was talking about, okay? Only in Kenya, and I think Senior Counsel Omogeni said this, can you find a situation of Aurora and Kimwarer where there's no land, there's no physical land, but you go ahead and design a dam in the air. You go ahead and pay billions of shillings for that dam designed in the air, much of which is shared in foreign cities. And an attempt to look at it shows that part of that money was used to buy, double cabin vehicles, towels, for hotel rooms, and all those people who are involved are in this regime. Where do you think this case would have gone? If it was to go anywhere, there are many more heads were going to fall. So for me, I knew that it had only one way to go, which is the way it has gone. Now, I think that what has Henry Rotich done? He was being appointed as an advisor. Yes. I think he did the politest thing that you can do when you do not want to be associated with anything, to decline and say, all I want to do is to go back to my old job, because he can't fit in that old job. He rose to the ranks to become the cabinet secretary in charge of Treasury. His old job was some much junior position within Treasury. How will he go back and work as a junior officer, much junior to the principal secretary, much junior to the cabinet secretary, and as he's held that high office? I think even he knows, and everyone knows, that he can't fit there. But I think it was his most honorable way of declining that appointment and basically throwing it back.
No. Let's hear from Okongo Omogeni, please. We'll come to you. Yeah, Okongo Omogeni, I wanted you just to weigh in on this development as well. First of all, even him being the presidential advisor on matters that are questionable during his tenure, do you think that is sort of a mismatch of seeking advice from a person who Eurobond has not been explained during his tenure, where we don't even have a targeted, where we don't even have a targeted or an accurate figure on what the country's sovereign debt is. I mean, we have different figures from different offices, as it were. Looking also at the former, the debt management office, was it Mr. Sirisia, who just resigned even before his retirement tenure elapses as well. What would be your comment?
I mean, Dubai, you're asking me the obvious. What do you expect from this regime?
I mean, Mugatana says these are very unfair questions.
Mugatana is my classmate, is a lawyer. When you come to this show, just relax. We say what we have to say, you say what you have to say. I mean, nobody's going to kill you because you kept quiet as we spoke. This is a debate.
No, it's got burning issues.
And there are divergent views.
Right, just continue.
Before I even say, I look at times I say, the Bible says, remove the speck in your eye before you remove the log in your eye.
In somebody else's eye, yeah.
As here, sitting here, this institution called Parliament.
Yeah.
Even if you did an opinion,
Yes.
poll, yes. Do you think Kenyans will have more faith in us than the judiciary? Just an opinion. We are rotten institution.
Agreed.
So we are the last people to speak about corruption in the judiciary. Even the Lord Jesus Christ will sympathize with us. We are the last people. So I disagree with you, Farham Halim, when you say that, the judiciary is corrupt, it has...
What did you
people
decide for
cannot
Parliament
dispense.
yourself?
I mean, the institution called Parliament is the worst. When you look at the 349 and 60 members of National Assembly and 67, You feel sorry. So if you talk about an institution that has actually built Kenyan confidence, it's the judiciary. Nobody has faith in the institution of parliament. I have to tell you, Mheshimiwa Mahalim, people would rather go to the courts to seek justice than in parliament. Because members of parliament are both day in, day out. We shift allegiance. We are appointed to be on the side of minority, you shift to majority side. You know, so I would rather say, let us remove the specs in our eyes. We see clearly before we speak. The judiciary is, I think, one of the most accountable institutions of the three. How many judges have been removed on allegations of corruption? In the last 5 years, three judges. Tell me any country in Africa that has a vibrant judicial service commission like the one we have here in Kenya, where you can make a report to the JSC, they will sit, do an independent investigation. If they find that there is a credible allegation on misconduct or corruption, they recommend the president to form a tribunal. So let's not accuse an institution that has come in for Kenyans in many occasions. Where we have failed, it's actually the judiciary that has risen to the occasion to save Kenya. So for me, I'll defend the judiciary. We all make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. That's why in our courts we have High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. So that if the High Court errs, then the Court of Appeal can do the correction, and finally the Supreme Court. So let's allow the judiciary to perform its duty in accordance with our Constitution. On the issue of bail, we all know the bar, and I can cite so many cases for Mheshimiwa Farah Mahalim. You know, before you deny an accused person bail, the prosecution must swear an affidavit. That's the standard in our courts. You must swear an affidavit, convince the court what are the compelling reasons why that particular person should not be denied bail. Because the Constitution states in black and white that bail is a constitutional right, unless, that's the word used, unless there are compelling reasons. So how will the court come to the conclusion that there are compelling reasons? It's by the prosecution putting before the court evidence that demonstrates that there are compelling reasons. So if there is anybody that we should blame, it is the prosecution and not the courts. If there is any blame, you blame the prosecution. That's how our jurisprudence has been built, and that's what the Constitution demands of us. On the issue of Arol and Kimorel, I started by saying that there is no country in the world where an independent office, you know, Rotich was taken to court by the office of the DPP, okay? The DPP took action after he received a file from the DCI, okay? And I believe before he made a decision to proceed to court, he sat, evaluated the evidence, and arrived at a conclusion that he had a case that could sustain a conviction in a court of law. But what we have seen in that particular case and in several other cases is that all of a sudden there is suddenly the prosecution loses interest, okay? The passion that was there to prosecute the case suddenly dies, and the court is left with no choice. Because the court will tell you, you have not adduced evidence that can sustain a conviction. And they have no choice other than to set free a suspect. And immediately, what do you see? The president tells you the only person who can be my advisor is Dr. Rotich. That takes us back to the issue of dynasty. This is a regime of, few friends.
It takes us back to the issue of?
The dynasty.
Okay.
This is a dynasty. You know, it's a cabal of a few friends who have benefited from the system. It's not about picking somebody who can objectively advise government. As you rightly said, if you want to create a perception that you are a government that does not condone corruption, then you pick people who are untainted. I know once the court sets you free, that should be the end of your, anything that touches on corrupt conduct on your person. But there is also the perception, Debal. How many people are out there who have the same qualifications like Rotich, who could have easily been picked to serve as advisors? Because as you rightly put it, if somebody was to pick that file again, any person from the Director of Public Prosecution, how do you proceed when the president of the day has told you I have full confidence on the guy who presided over this Arol and Kimorel scandal? I've picked him, he's my advisor. If you are a prosecutor, you will be left with no other conclusion other than that the president does not want anybody around that scandal to be touched. So I think the president needs to deal with public perception. The message we are getting now, the message Kenyans are saying, is that the fight against corruption from this particular regime is lukewarm.
Lukewarm, right.
Is lukewarm.
Thank you. Honorable Mugatana.
Yeah, let's discuss the issue of former head of Treasury, Rotich. I don't know if my learned friends here, colleagues, watched what was happening in court, okay? What was happening in court was that prosecution witnesses were not being examined, They were not even being led in evidence by the prosecutor. And the DPP has full mandate, according to the Constitution, Article 157. He's in charge of prosecution. He's the one who can prosecute either himself in person, or he can give that, he can delegate that authority to any of his officers. And I'm sure the officer who was in court to prosecute that matter was a competent officer. Now, if you are a prosecutor, and because I watched it with interest myself, this witness is being called, and the witness has recanted his evidence. Another witness is being called. He says different from what is in the statement. And then the prosecutor is not asking questions to some of the witnesses who are there. So when you look at that Henry Rotich criminal prosecution, you can see that there was a dereliction of duty from the prosecutor who was in charge. And in fact,
So was it designed? Is a dereliction of duty?
This is where I'm coming. This is where I'm coming. Because if someone decides he's not doing the work, let's say I'm a cabinet secretary, or I am a senator, and I'm not doing my work. I'm simply not doing my work. Does it mean that now the government sat with me and told me, you should not do your work? Is indeed now an issue of a personal decision not to do what you're supposed to do? There is a case which was filed by, I think, one of these organizations to go and challenge the conduct of the prosecution officers who are involved in that case. And it will be of interest to see what comes out of it. But the point I'm trying to make is that those who are listening to us should refuse to be persuaded that there is in fact a pattern. There's no pattern. To my knowledge, this matter was prosecuted right to the end, and whether the prosecution was carried out to the standard that was required, that is a matter that is before court, and it's going to be decided by a judge of competent jurisdiction. So I think we shouldn't, the problem, the issue I'm having with my colleagues here is the fact that they are generalizing things. You pick up one case and then you say it's how many cases are going on in this country, surely, that are being successfully prosecuted, So it's not fair to paint the government in a certain way just because you happen to be in the opposition. And this brings me to that issue of regime. Even if you open your dictionary right now, you will see what a definition of regime is. Regime is an authoritarian government. And I'm telling you that our colleagues use that word deliberately to try and paint a picture It's not a question of legitimacy or illegitimacy, because I know Otiendo Omolo knows what a legitimate government is, and this is a legitimate government. It is established by law. It is by constitution established. We went through all the processes. And then it is also, unfair also to try and, characterize Senator Mungatana as an apologist of the government. You know what an apologist is? An apologist is a person who makes an argument for a controversial issue. But I'm not an apologist. I am a supporter of this government. I was elected on UDA. Right. I believe that we are doing well. In fact, the stamp of authority is in the Kenya shillings. Any person who has been looking now will tell you that in January,
let's not go to the shilling.
No,
we'll come to the shilling much later, because I don't want to lose the track of thought.
I'm just trying to tell you that the reason I support this government is because there are tangible things that are happening. Look, in January, we were talking about the Kenya shilling, in comparison with what is happening with the local currencies. The Tanzanian shilling was going at, versus Kenya shillings, was going at 15. Now it has rallied up. In January now to February, we are talking about 16. 1 Kenya shillings to 16. I was there last week in Dodoma, so I know for a fact. The Ugandan shillings was at 23.6, I think, in January. Now it has gone up again. Against the Kenya shillings has gone up. And if you look at the general performance of our shilling, it has stabilized. All of you who are following what is happening in the forex market, you would see that we have stabilized at around 160 to the dollar. So what I'm saying is I have reasons, in fact stable reasons, for standing with this government, not as an apologist, but as a person who believes that we have turned the corner. We were in a bad place when we took over.
But being an apologist is not a bad thing entirely.
We have turned the corner, and we are going in the correct
All right,
direction.
okay. But first we need to also make correction, because you say that you're misleading the public when you talk about regime, and you say it's what? It's
an authoritarian.
But according to the dictionary.
Yes, according to the dictionary.
I can't see it anywhere here. Which dictionary you use?
No, can I read mine?
Because mine says it's a regular pattern of occurrence or action. No. As of seasonal rainfall, that is just one of it. Yeah. Then we have characteristics, behavior, orderly procedure of a natural phenomenon or process. Then also a mode of rule or management, a form of government.
Continue. Yes, the authoritarian.
Wait. A socialist regime.
Exactly, authoritarian.
What is a socialist regime?
No.
Or a period of rule?
Let me read you what whatever is saying here.
It depends. You can pick your dictionary also.
No.
That really speaks to
a regime is never used in a positive.
Okay.
In fact, it is normally a military junta or a military regime. And they use that word deliberately to try and point this government as if it is a dictatorship. And it is not. We were elected. They lost the election. They have never come out of that. And I'm urging my colleagues to just accept it so that they can do proper opposition politics.
All right. Let's say Farah. It's Farah's turn.
Let me tell you one thing. He's not only an apologist, but a supporter, because he belongs to that party.
You're a sympathizer.
I'm not a sympathizer. Now, he calls me a sympathizer. Hang on a minute. He calls me a sympathizer. I gave, in my constituency, William Ruto got less than 2% of the votes. 90+% of the votes was given to Raila Odinga. When we came out of the courts, and the courts ruled in favor of the maintaining or upholding that, the results of the election as per the IBC, we were all saying that the judiciary is corrupt. Judiciary didn't compromise. We're all over. Today, because there is a tiff between the executive and the judiciary, everybody now on our side, on the ODM side or in Azimio side, is saying, the judiciary is the best. It's the only institution that is the least corrupt. But hardly a year and a half ago, we were everybody at the highest, saying, no, they've been compromised. At none other than the highest level of the Supreme Court itself. So, personally, I am not a sympathizer, I'm not an apologist, I'm an objective person, and I've conducted my politics throughout. My 30 plus years of being in politics, I've never been a sycophant of anybody. Not on my own side when we were winning the elections or when we were basically in government, because there's a time we were in government, whether you want to call us regime that time or not, because we were the Prime Minister in the 10th Parliament. And Parliament itself was headed by 2 people from ODM. So what I'm trying to say is that, look, let us not always we transact one issue and then we decide our whole politics revolves around that issue. Today you're supporting somebody, the next day you're saying that that institution or that arm of government is very corrupt. The other day, we have a problem. What we need to be also, I don't deny myself the fact that there is corruption in the executive. There is corruption in Parliament. I'm the one who's talking about legislature. And thank you thanks a lot to Mogherini for supporting me on that and saying, let's look inward ourselves, introspectively, and before we start calling other places. Parliament is a mess. But then, you can't suddenly decide today that judiciary is the whitest of the white because they have an issue on matters that essentially some of us have a reason even to disagree with the judiciary. Because right now, any project that you have, anybody can walk into a judge there and get orders. We are unable to move on anything. And government, which is everywhere, and ex-party, by the way, not even inter-party. Government which is anywhere, which can be served anywhere. Why not serve the government and call them to come for inter-party and listen to both sides instead of stopping a project? On the issue of the appointment of Rotich, I have a problem. I'll tell you the reason of the problem I have right now myself. I'm not going to talk about the guilt or the lack of guilt of Rotich himself on the matters of... but ordinarily, the president, when he's appointing somebody, you should have called that person and tell him, look, I wish to appoint you as this.
Correct.
And if he has an issue with that, and you don't announce it.
Correct.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not right for a government, for somebody to be appointed by the head of state.
Without his knowledge.
And decline.
And decline. On whether he can, it's fair for him to go back to his old central bank and take up a position below what he is. There are members of parliament, there are former ministers who want to become CAS now, you know what I mean? There are former ministers, former members of parliament who are PSs. You understand my point? You never get into a certain position and basically find it too low to go and do something different from that. And because this is not a parliamentary system now, it's a presidential system where the cabinet comes from outside parliament and outside the elected lot. I mean, any position within the government that whether somebody was a minister before and he becomes a board member, how many former ministers used to be just board members of parastatals? And they were ministers before that. And or in some few cases, even as chairman of some of those small inconsequential boards. I mean, that is somebody's, if he thinks he can contribute to the development of the country and he can get his self-satisfaction from going back to his own position, and he still has not reached the mandatory age of retirement, which is about 60 for government civil servants right now. I mean, it's a right he has, a choice he has. I'm sure he has a reason for wanting to go back there very badly, because maybe he thinks he can help the country in one way or the other. So to that extent, I think it should have been, there should have been some prior consultation.
Thank you.
Before this has happened.
Right. We want to speak just broadly.
As to all these ghost projects, we're very selective in the manner we pick up ghost projects.
Right, Father, before we go to
there are very many ghost projects. There are thousands upon thousands of ghost projects in this country. Let us deal with them all holistically and say, let's go back, go through these things with a forensic audit, find out every project whether it exists on the ground, and begin taking people to courts and asking people to be accountable for their actions, or inactions for that matter. Omission or commission. Thank you. So the business of just using power and politics because it's convenient for that moment, and support or lack of support, I think it's a problem this country has got to grow out of.
I wanted just to gravitate this discussion, even as you're talking about these appointments, especially what is being raised by the opposition leader, that there's an attempt to sort of bypass the Article 240 of the Constitution on the National Security Council, where he's raising hesitation with the fact that we have the president who is seeking to have a national security advisor appointed by him. And if you just flip on what we have on page 5 of the Standard as well, he's cautioning against this security legislation that is coming. He says the Office of a National Security Advisor is an attempt by Kenya Kwanza to create a new national security organ outside the provision of the Constitution. And he says Parliament has no power unless through a constitutional amendment to alter mandate of the National Security Council. So what is the president really up to when it comes to this particular office? And even as you're talking about these advisors, when we're talking about these advisors, the question that Dawa was trying to raise, who is running government? Is this a panel of advisors that the government is, or is making sure that the operations of the government is being steamrolled? Or we have institutions, we have the cabinet secretaries, we have the legislature, we have the executive itself, we have also the National Assembly. I think it's Otiende Amolo's time.
Can I just mention one thing? Me and Otiende Amolo are in JLAC, and that has been roundly rejected by the committee. The issue of the advisor being in that thing. Yeah, it appeared before the committee.
Oh, it did?
It's unconstitutional, and basically, and it was unanimous on both sides of what you call the divide, that we cannot allow that. You can't change the constitution from on that thing.
Well, I don't know.
But we need to find the spirit of.
Let me respond.
Okay.
First, there's nothing surprising about that move right now, because it is the usual modus operandi of this regime. And it is a regime. A regime is a form of government.
Now this one really defines, it qualifies itself.
Yes. When it defines it as one that describes a government which is authoritarian and heavy-handed, then that's a more apt description of this regime. and I can demonstrate that. So there's nothing wrong with that. Look, this regime has mastered the art of introducing very important bills at the latest stage possible, fast-tracking it at the committee stage, running roughshod over everybody on the floor of Parliament, and enacting it into legislation. Many times we have been saved from some of them by the courts, but some have come to pass, and that's what they were doing here. Honorable Farah and I are in the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. He will tell you that yesterday there was public participation. I did not attend, because the first notification of that was on Friday at 6:59 p.m. Farah, you can check.
Which is 7 o'clock, actually.
Yes, 7 o'clock on Friday.
Public participation
on this bill. For members of the committee to be there yesterday at 9:30 a.m. and we were being notified when we were on recess at 7 p.m. That's why I could not make it. Because as I explained earlier, I had things that I had prior planned.
So this is just a matter of formality.
Now, why we would be notified on a Friday at 7 p.m. for public participation of an important bill like this on Monday at 9:30, I don't know. But that's an internal matter we will be dealing with. Yesterday, from the notification, we had 66 people lined up for public participation. I don't know whether Farah attended, but how you can deal with 66 representations in one day, I don't know. I don't know how we manage as a committee, because there are 66 people and entities. Even if you give everybody an average of 5 minutes, I don't know if you can manage. But I am saying that it is it's the modus operandi. So when Farah says it was roundly rejected, I don't know, because what I know is usually after public participation, then you sit down as a committee and deliberate. I am sure we have not sat as a committee yet.
Yes.
We actually have another sitting this morning at 9:30 with the Attorney General. So you can't tell the country that unanimously as a committee, and we were two committees, because it was the Justice and Legal Affairs and the one on National Administration, which means we'll have to have a joint sitting.
We've already had a joint sitting.
Now to do the report.
Yes.
But what I can tell you, therefore, is that that process and then bringing it just a day to opening of Parliament is also very curious. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to the deliberations, I will be raising fairly serious issues, and I don't know whether they came out in public participation or not. But they are fundamental issues. The first one is that this bill seeks to regularize the position of chief administrative secretaries. You remember we are in a situation where it's the same bill, yes. We are in a situation where the courts had pronounced themselves that CASs are unconstitutional. In my view, you cannot regularize an unconstitutional matter through a bill. You would have to go to the Constitution itself. That is a discussion we'll be having. Secondly, is this animal called National Security Advisor. The bill seeks, contrary to Article 239, Article 239 creates the national security organ, and therefore, and they're very specific. Then Article 240 talks of the composition of the National Security Council, and there are 9 identified officers by name. You cannot, by legislation, purport to add to that list. You can't. You cannot add and you cannot subtract by legislation. But it goes even further. It then creates what it's calling the National Security Council Committee. Now, this committee introduces another 19 officers into the committee, which means it's a way of sneaking 19 other officials into the National Security Council. Because they are now being created as a committee, identified, which means you're creating a National Security Council of 28, contrary to the Constitution. But it doesn't stop there. It then says in the ultimate paragraph that you could not, such other persons whose knowledge and skills may be determined to be necessary. You know what that means? It's not even 28. You could add another 100. And not just 100 people who are known. You could even add foreign nationals. Do you know in the National Security Council, Article 240, the 9 persons who are members must all be Kenyans. And but under Article 78. And there's a good reason. But now you're opening a window where you can even bring people from Haiti. And there's good reason to mention Haiti, to become members of the National Security Council in reciprocation. It is outrageous. Then there's a third issue. They're amending Section 28, they're proposing to amend Section 28 of the Office of the Attorney General Act to delete it. What does Section 28 say? That the Attorney General shall be the custodian of the public seal. Why? Who has a problem with the AG being the custodian of the public seal? And if you remove it, where will this public seal be? What mischief do you want to do with our public seal? That you now want to remove it from the AG? Then they also propose to amend the assumption of office of the President Committee. Usually there's an act that defines. And one of the things they propose to do is bring in the CS for Defense, and then bring in 6 additional persons.
3 additional, before it used to be 6.
Yeah, it was.
It used to be 3 and an additional 3.
Yes. You know, nominated by the
incoming president.
The incoming and all that.
Yeah.
Now remember, this is at a time that there will always be contestations in the courts, in the Supreme Court. So you are bringing persons, many more persons, of the person declared by IBC to have won, but not validated by the court. You can see how skewed that is. So the whole thing is this. That whole bill is ill-intentioned, and it is being rushed. And although Honorable Mwalim tells us here that he is sure that as the committee will reject it, I'm in that committee and I've seen how we work. If instructions come, even those who have assured you that they do not find favor with this will turn. So all I can do is speak for myself, not for the committee. That for me, I would reject it. And you know, it's possible. As a sympathizer, you are not always given the full knowledge that Apollo deserves.
Let's see, Okongo, we'll come to you. We'll come to you. It's Okongo's time.
No. Anytime you're not in Agwambo for Onobolo to tell Amolo, you're either sympathizer, apologist,
Okongo, because this also will come to the Senate as well. And you
No,
can see,
we cannot be sure.
You cannot be sure.
The way legislation, the problem we have. And
Because
let's
I'm
be
a member of the
candid.
committee, can I just...
Let me
can you
tell
just
you.
execute the
Let's be candid.
Yes.
The problem we have, and unless we solve it, we will always have bad legislations. The problem we have is this habit where the executive sends a bill to Parliament, and then there are people within committees who keep on reporting back to the executive. And then when very good proposals are coming to the floor, telephone calls coming. And you find people changing positions, including my friend here, Farah Mahali. They change positions at times on the floor. Like these suckers of IEBC. IEBC, we had a fantastic chair of Justice Legal Affairs Committee, Senator Sigay. He came to the floor with agreed positions from the committee. Very progressive, and we were all very excited, including a proposal to delete Public Service Commission from constituting the panelists.
I remember.
And they tabled the report, and immediate phones were made and said, look at what Sigay has done. In the afternoon, and Senator Mgadana was there. In the afternoon, a poor Sigay just came in and said, I want to withdraw the proposed amendment. And it's taken a whole year.
And there was a no-show also to this panel.
We have gone round and round. Now NADCO is making the same proposals. That if the executive had left Parliament to do its work, would have done a good job, created a panel that enjoys the confidence of Kenyans, and we will not have a problem. So I think I want to speak to my President, William Ruto, if he's watching this show. Let him give space to Parliament. It cannot be that Parliament has 406 fools who cannot think, who cannot enrich a bill, who cannot pass a verdict. These are wise men and women. Will you make a proposal to Parliament, allow Parliament? The way Kibaki did, he gave a free hand to Parliament. Farah Mahali was a deputy speaker then. He gave a free hand to Parliament. Allow us to sit. If it's a committee of 16, if you give them a leeway, they will discuss, they will arrive at compromises, and you'll have good legislations, and don't rush things. Look at the decisions from court. Read the decision that was argued by myself and Otiende Amolo on the finance bill. The courts are questioning, why are you sneaking such an important tax measure on housing levy into a finance bill? Why not bring a standalone legislation, take it through public participation, and then Parliament either enacts or rejects? Why are you sneaking it in? There's been this tendency of sneaking several amendments of various legislations into miscellaneous amendment bill so that it's pushed and sneaked through Parliament. It's a very bad habit. And unless we do that, we'll always have bad legislations that will be struck off by our courts. So the first thing, number one, the executive should not try to control Parliament. Number two, let us give adequate time. Have you heard the predicament of Honorable Otiende Amolo? You give members of Parliament a one-day notice, you list 60 interest groups. You said 60? 66 to give views on one day. Where are we rushing to? Where are we rushing to? The bar. That tells you that there is mischief somewhere. And I really sympathize at times with the office of Attorney General, because legislation should be processed through the office of Attorney General. But I don't know what rifts exist between the office of Attorney General and the President that we want to bypass that very important constitutional office in legislations. I pray that that bill will also be brought to the Senate, okay? So that you allow the two houses to have an input.
But we need to interrogate also what is the motive. Given what Otiende Amolo is raising, those are serious.
I'm sure
to improve security. Even to the extent.
And then I want to advise my learned friend Mgatana not to talk too much about the legitimacy of the current regime. If you followed the discussions in NADCO, 4 IBC commissioners told the panel, and it's in the report, you can read it. They told the panel, the NDs, the NADCO committee members, that the commissioners never had a chance to verify the results from 22 constituencies. And that the chairman of IEBC, no, you brought it. We have to tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
And the chairman of IEBC, Chebukati, who was the returning officer, actually told the other commissioners that I don't care. I don't care what your position is. Those who want can follow me as I declare the results. And imagine, out of 7 commissioners, 4 had an issue with the declaration of presidential results. 4 out of 7. So serious was this issue that we have proposed as NADCO. We have proposed as NADCO that going forward, we must amend the constitution to allow the 7 commissioners of IBC to be fully involved in the verification and final declaration of presidential results. And we have even made a recommendation that there should be an audit of the entire presidential election results. So there's a big issue. And finally, Dibal, we also arrived at a conclusion that the 14 days were not adequate for the Supreme Court to go to the details of the issues that were raised before it. So as a cure, we have made a proposal that the days of hearing a presidential petition be expanded to 21. So there are so many issues around the 2022 election that we should not even be raising them before this show. Finally, the final point on the dollar. On the dollar.
Please,
on the dollar.
Let's not go on the dollar. I need to take a short break.
On the dollar. You know, Dibal, when this regime took over, the dollar was trading against the shilling at 123 shillings. Now, if you tell us it's come down from 166,
and I have a very good
from 160, no, not about a good thing. What we need to tell Kenyans is where you have taken
break right now.
From 123
hang on to that thought.
to 160.
Hang on to that. Hang on. We take a short break. We settle back with that particular issue that you're raising. Even IBC, we know that we have the Ministry of Interior. Once the IBC servers to be domiciled in the country, this is what they're suggesting. There is a legislation of that as well. So maybe also the question of Jose Camargo being domiciled somewhere also came to bear. And that's why we'll try and tackle and see what is actually behind that particular legislation as well. We take a short break. When we circle back, of course, we continue with Siasa Fiesta. Don't go away.